Hello everyone, my name is Maghanga, and today we're going to talk about privatization and neoliberalism in general. Recently, there's been a wave of privatization of public utilities, public institutions taking place in Kenya. Recently, we've seen what the government has been trying to do with our airports, for instance, leasing them off, as they say, to this Adani group, which is an international corporate entity, to run our airports for the next 30 years. There's been so many questions that Kenyans have had as regards these deals, but as regards privatization in general. What is the background of privatization? Why do public institutions and entities get auctioned off to private entities for privatization? Why do assets that belong to the people get privatized off to people who played no part in establishing them? In looking at the background to privatization, what we need to remember and to understand is that this is a characteristic of this present capitalist system that we have. A look at the establishment of capitalism itself would reveal that in order for capitalism to get established in any particular area, the first thing that takes place is dispossession. And by this, what we mean is that if capitalism is coming to be established in a particular area over a particular people, the first thing that these capitalists do is to take away anything or everything that these people own and control. When we look at the manner in which capitalism was established in Kenya, we see that when the colonialists came, the first thing they did was to take away everything that the African people owned. And specifically, we are talking about our land, we're talking about our livestock, we're talking about our resources, our means of livelihood. Anything that you had that you could use to make a living, they took away. And the purpose of this was to create an impoverished class of people who have nothing to rely on, and therefore they are forced to go to seek employment to these capitalists, who also happen to be the same people who are now colonizing us. So when you look at the establishment of capitalism, we see that it is being established through dispossession in the first place. Capitalism cannot thrive in an environment or in a society in which already people have means of sustaining themselves outside the capitalist system. So when you look at how things get privatized today, we see that since the time that Kenya gained formal independence from the British colonialists, there were certain institutions, there were certain assets that they got to own and to control, of course, for the provision of public utilities. These assets and these institutions include, of course, the airports that we're talking about, the schools, the institutions such as universities, hospitals, basically entities that were there to serve the people of Kenya. All these have been providing services such as healthcare, education, social security, etc., to the people of Kenya for this time that Kenya has been existing as an entity. Of course, the provision of these services has not been to the standard that the Kenyan people deserve, but nonetheless, there's been a role that these institutions have continued to play. But in order for capitalism to continue making even more profit, the idea has always been to take away even these assets that the people have, in order to create a situation where the people are further impoverished and the people are further desperate to continue depending on these very capitalists in order to make a living. Over the years, over the decades in which neoliberalism has existed, we've seen a further drop in the real wage of the people. Even if sometimes the actual wage might rise up, the real wage, which is your earnings vis-a-vis the amount of goods and services that your earnings can actually purchase for you, we've seen this continually dropping. And what this, of course, has created is a situation in which people continue to be impoverished further and continue to be even more desperate to rely on these capitalists in order to make a living. So when you look at Kenya today, we can see that privatization has been taking many different forms, and we have seen that in the course of our history, since the 1980s, when the structural adjustment programs were introduced, there's been a series of privatization that continue to take place, that saw institution after institution, entity after entity, enterprise after enterprise go into private hands from public control. We saw enterprises such as the Kenya Posts and Telecommunication Company get privatized. We saw the Kenya Airways, in which, in as much as the government does retain some shares, we see that the bulk of those shares got privatized. The same to the telecom company, Kenya Seed Company. We've seen so many public institutions lose their shares to private entities. And all this is part of this neoliberal offensive. Today, the wave of privatization taking place. Assets that have been left under the control of the public, such as the airports, such as the ports, are continually under the risk of getting privatized. The Ruto regime placing our airports under the possible control of this Adani group, which is poised to take over the running of our airports for the next 30 years. The government taking loans from international financial institutions has placed our port in Mombasa as collateral. We've seen how public institutions, therefore, and public assets are being used as collateral for odious debt that the government of Kenya continues to take, which the people of Kenya don't know anything about, and which the people of Kenya do not even benefit from. All these, of course, we see as a continuation of this neoliberal offensive, which of course pushes for the passage of public assets from the control of the public, from the control of the people, into the control of private entities. So what is the effect? If right now we're hearing about Adani Group taking over our airports, our port in Mombasa getting privatized, our public universities getting privatized, what do we expect to be the effect on the people of Kenya? Of course, the first thing we know when privatization takes place is that all the workers that were employed in these institutions, majority of those employments are permanent basis. Most of those workers will get retrenched. Most of those workers' terms of service will get revised so that if you are employed permanently, it's reduced to a contract. If you are paid this amount, it's reduced by half, etc., etc. Joblessness and lack of employment is usually one of the first direct consequences of privatization. And we've seen this happen in telecom. People got retrenched massively. In posta, this has a ripple effect. It continues to increase the inequality in the country. People who previously had a security, they had a means of income, now lack that means of income. An increase in impoverishment. If you are earning a salary every month, and now that's no longer the case, even the people from whom you used to buy your groceries, buy your supplies for your local consumption at home, they will lack that purchasing ability from you. So it has a ripple effect in the economy. Since the beginning of the structural adjustment programs, since the beginning of this neoliberal offensive, inequality has in fact increased, not only in Kenya, but globally. According to Oxfam, right now, only 8,300 people in Kenya are dollar millionaires. Their net worth is at least $1 million, $1 million and above. According to Oxfam, 0.01% of the population in Kenya owns more wealth than the rest, 99.99%. We can see how inequality has continued to increase, and all this is as a result of this push to privatize everything that belongs to the public. So people are going to get poorer, and the inequality is only poised to get worse. What is the way forward, Kenyans, therefore? Having looked at this wave of privatization, having looked at this neoliberal offensive, what should be the way forward? First of all, Kenyans should remember that access to quality education, to housing, healthcare, clean water, social security, all these things are our right as a people. We absolutely deserve to live in a society in which we have access to these things. Therefore, Kenyans should understand that any privatization of what belongs to them would deprive them of access to these things, and these things are their rights. Kenyans must be steadfast and must stand up and reject any privatization of public institutions and demand that whatever has been passed to private hands be returned back to the public, and that they access what is theirs by right. Article 43 of the Constitution of Kenya states that Kenyans have a right to access food and housing and healthcare and social security. It is absolutely their right. And therefore, Kenyans must demand their right, demand that whatever has been taken away from them be returned back to them. They must demand that they live a life of dignity.